And it gives me great pleasure to begin this evening's session by asking Velson Horry, who's Director of Business Change, exceptionally well qualified to do this task, to introduce our two speakers tonight. Over to you, Velson, please.
Thank you very much, Alex. So I'd just first like to say, just before I introduced Subbu and Emily, who I'm sure many of you know, just to emphasise how critical this subject is. I think we all saw the news yesterday about these the 10 goals that the UK is setting, but within the investment management space, there's been a huge interest and increasing interest in not just how do you do sustainability, governance, environmental considerations as an add-on, but how you embed this subject into the core of the business process. And this is being driven both by clients, as clients are increasingly wanting to make sure that they're investing for their long-term future, not just financially, but taking account of all the impacts of their investment decisions, but also from within the investment houses themselves, as we're getting new generations of staff who are really motivated, really dedicated to considering those impacts of the investment decisions they make. So this session is, as I say, will be led by Emily and then Subbu. So both of whom members in very good standing of the National Liberal Club. Emily has been a senior executive at Pico Analytics. She's the COO and CFO, and she's been working on sort of sustainability disclosures on the climate risk impacts and on how you implement the ESG regulations into asset management, into pension funds and into hedge funds. And this is something that's particularly relevant at the moment, as some of you may know, there's a new EU regulation dealing with how sustainability is reported that's having a big impact on sustainable funds and how people do sustainable investments. One other thing I'd like to highlight in Emily's career, which I did find interesting, was she was trained by Al Gore, who I think people know both as the ex-US vice president, but also as someone who did a series of documentaries that was quite important on this a few years back. And we also like to introduce Subbu Loganathan, who I think will be doing who grandly introduced himself as the talent earlier, and I hope he lives up to that billing and justifies his lack of tie. Subbu also has about 18 years experience across investment banking, asset management, and in fintech, and he's our industry expert in what we call ESG, which is environmental, social, and governance metrics and frameworks, and on how you integrate that with how you look at portfolio management, with investment strategies, with how you set up pensions. And he's been looking at how institutions, so pension funds, asset managers, property and investment banks, can set up sort of sustainable funds, how you can do green bond financing, and how you actually disclose that in a way that meets the regulatory requirements, but also covers what clients need to know and what they need to hear. So without any more of me taking up your time, I'd like to just hand back to Alex just for the ground rules before we can be handed back to Subbu and Emily. So, and I'd also like to say thank you very much for taking the time to speak on this, because as I said earlier, this is a key topic that I think will get more and more importance in people's investment decisions and how that impacts their personal decisions and their personal financial outlook.
Thank you very much, Velson. That's really helpful to understand where people are coming from and the background. Just before we dive in fully, just to say that we are recording this session, for the benefit of those who can't be here, and also very, very grateful to Simon Roberts and Jonathan Broad and colleagues, indeed to Subbu and Emily, for making the technical side of this run so wonderfully smoothly. I'm very, very grateful. So far, so good anyway. You'll all be familiar with the business of muting, so you're going to be muted while you're not speaking, because we'll have Subbu and Emily speaking, and then when we come to the end of their session, I will invite people to either wave a hand or in other words, to attract my attention, and then we'll bring people in to ask questions. But during the course of the presentation, you can always add questions using the chat facility and pop them into there. The chat is at the bottom of the screen under the word chat, and you can pop questions in there, and then we can accumulate those during the course of the session, and then Subbu and Emily and indeed anybody else who would like to contribute can then take those on progressively. So that's the plan for that. And we're going to aim to finish around about 7:30, 7:35 in terms of presentation. And then we'll move on to questions, and then we'll round up just before 8 o'clock. So that's the general bit of the program. I hope that's all very clear. If somebody finds themselves struggling, again, just trying to attract my attention visually, that's always good. And I'll do my best to intervene and to assist, or to indeed to bring on board the able talent of Emily and colleagues to do that task. Okay, that's enough from me, I think. Subbu and Emily, look forward very much to telling us how to invest so as to save the planet.
Thanks, Alex, and thank you, Wilson. Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. We have a couple of slides. Perfect. Okay, so obviously it's investing to save the planet. It sounded a lot more catchy than sustainable investing, which is essentially what we're going to talk about. We'll go through the what, the why, and the how. And a couple of disclaimers before we start, actually. All investment involves risk. We are not investment advisors. We are only going to go through the principles of ESG and sustainable investing and impact investing. There's no recommendation to invest. All names of companies, funds, markets are included as indicative and for illustrative purposes only. Okay. Okay, so the alphabet soup that everyone is hearing about and everyone's getting scared of, starting with ESG, SDG, sustainable investing, PRI, SRI, responsible investments, etc., etc. It's enough to make anyone go a little bit crazy. And I totally understand, which is why I'm going to try to not delve too much into the jargon and stick to the basics. But effectively, we will try to go through the different degrees of sustainable investing, or investing in a way that will help the planet and eventually save the planet, as the talk indicates. Okay, so we start with what is ESG. So ESG is environmental, social, or governance concerns. And as far as investing is concerned, whether it's your pensions or your investments, your individual funds, your stocks or your bonds, it's a certain set of criteria. So environmental criteria define how a particular company or a firm acts towards the planet. Social criteria defines how a company treats employees, its customers, the suppliers, the local communities. Effectively, the vertical integration, both the suppliers and the customers, vendors, everything in the life cycle of what makes a particular firm. Governance criteria indicate how a company is actually run. Internally, what is the median gender pay? What is the remuneration structure, the governance structure, shareholder rights, etc. So there are a total of 150 metrics for all of these. I will not go through all of them. I'll just stick to the main ones for each of these criteria, which you probably would need to know when you're trying to invest based on ESG. The environmental criteria include carbon usage, carbon emissions, the tons of carbon that are either used directly or indirectly by a firm. What is the impact of the company to land, to biodiversity, to the flora and fauna as a result of its activities? water pollution, water usage, direct and indirect water emissions. Energy, again, it's kind of related to carbon and emissions, but energy usage, energy production, energy wastage in terms of kilowatts. So these are the key environmental criteria they would look at for a particular company to decide how it impacts the planet, which is sort of directly related to the talk, which is how do you invest to save the planet. Social and governance, on the other hand, are how do you invest to make sure the human and governance activities of a particular company are fair. And so how do you almost save humanity to save the planet, if you will? Social criteria include labor, arms, if there are any controversial weapons that the particular firm has invested in or is producing, human rights, human trafficking, your labor laws, etc. Going back to governance, gender pay is a key activity and a key metric. Protection, corruption, anti-bribery. As we'll see in the examples, key things like anti-corruption, anti-bribery, and pay equality and discrimination actually are forming a lot more, are gaining a lot more importance in the ESG criteria. Next slide. Thank you. So put in some examples here, taking UK companies, and where possible, I took companies that were either well-known or have recently been in the news. So examples of good, there's a firm called Grow Bristol, which is our local Bristol company. It's an organic food producing and organic community outgrowth company, and it regularly ranks as one of the top 10 sustainable companies in the UK from an environmental perspective. It's a classic example of a firm where everything is locally sourced and where everything is has a very low carbon footprint, low emissions, and it also does good for the community. Social, John Lewis, of course, everyone's heard of John Lewis, Waitrose, but they've been they've been socially responsible since before it became fashionable in terms of how they treat the employees, the customers, and suppliers. Governance, funnily enough, Diageo, which owns Guinness and other beverages that we all like, had a very transparent and flat governance structure, and their median pay and gender pay gap is actually much better compared to their peers. Examples are bad. Southern Water is a classic example of a water company that involves a lot of water pollution, and because they have a quasi monopoly in their particular market, they haven't improved their practices in a long time. Boohoo, that we all saw and heard during the lockdown, their abusive employment practices. It's a classic example of a company that would score very less in the social part of ESG criteria. And Bell Pottinger, I think the company has actually now gone bankrupt. It's a public relations media firm that got caught up in a scandal in South Africa, where they were due to underhand dealings, etc. And it's a classic example of a company where whistleblowing was not encouraged, where there was not proper governance and checks and balances of the way the business was run for a particular firm. Next slide, please. Okay, so we saw all this. So why now? So we saw good companies, good ESG companies, and we saw bad ESG companies. We can come back and say, okay, yes, so these firms do badly in environmental, social, or governance concerns. But if I get dividends through them, if I get returns, maybe I should still invest in them. Not so. So research has proven, data has proven over the last 3, 5, and 10 years that funds that are focusing on better environmental, social, governance concerns are beating their conventional rivals. This is data from this year. And this year was actually a class example of where you had an extraneous impact on the market, the COVID-19 lockdowns. You still saw ESG funds consistently outperforming. So the first reason why you should focus on them is they might provide a better return than conventional strategies. Next slide, please. Thank you. So the second reason is, again, it's good for your portfolio. The sustainability focused funds provide a better breadth of the market. They provide more stable returns, and they provide a higher benchmark in terms of returns compared to ordinary funds or ordinary firms. So the two graphs there are showing the US versus global. And the reason we focus on the US for 2018, so in 2019, is because the US has traditionally been the hub of asset management, but they also have been a bit of laggards in terms of sustainability focused funds. So where you've seen, so the yellow is the S&P 500 on the left, and all the other sustainability focused funds have actually outperformed, even though, as you know, in the US, till between 2017 to 2019, there was not much support for sustainability-based strategies or any governance-related sustainability. The FTSE for Good index is an index of UK companies, and that has actually risen 125% over 10 years. So when we look at historical analysis, we can see that it's actually, even before ESG became a thing, even before the Paris Climate Agreement, if we had focused on companies with strong environmental, social, and governance concerns, we would have done well, if not better. So to paraphrase our Prime Minister, you can have your locally sourced cake and eat it too, in this case. Thank you. Thank you. We see major institutional investors and governments are doing it. Why that's important? Because any investment, so where your pensions go, where your investments go, where your money goes, it traditionally tends to follow where the major institutional investors go. So the world's largest retirement scheme, the Japan pension fund, the government pension fund Japan, has become a vocal proponent of responsible investing. CalPERS, which is a California pension fund with assets of $244 billion, wants to move to 100% sustainability in investments. And countries, Japan and China, have both spoken about their net zero pledges. By net zero, they mean they will slash the carbon emissions and achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 or 2060. And of course, the UK has now come to the party, so which is the fourth key reason why we should be looking at this from a purely investment perspective. Even the Conservatives are doing it. And apologies, I didn't want to bring politics into this, but it's actually a compliment, because the current government and the previous parliament before this are ostensibly more business friendly and more economically sound policies. So green recovery, or a Green New Deal, or Build Back Better, all this jargon that you can hear, is not just something that sounds good. It's actually economically sound. So reduction in petrol and diesel cars by 2030, which means that it is going to reduce it's going to reduce revenue for any carbon intensive fossil fuel based firms. 8, where you have world leading industry in carbon capture and storage, which will increase more impact investments that Emily will speak about shortly. And commercializing low carbon technologies or renewables, which again lends itself to more mainstreaming of impact investments. Okay, so now we go to the how, and there's a short video that we want to show, which explains as well.
Impact investing. According to research by the Financial Times, the amount of capital invested in impact has doubled over the last 5 years. But what is it exactly? The most accepted definition for impact investing is investing with the specific objective of achieving positive social and/or environmental impact as well as financial return. So a positive impact and financial return. Just to make you a bit more familiar with the term, let's place it on a scale with other sorts of investments. On the right, you see traditional investing. This is what we call investing for the sole purpose of financial return, with no impact objectives. With responsible investing, we filter out harmful investments like weapons or tobacco, for example. When you're into sustainable investing, you invest in companies that take into account environmental, social, and governance criteria. Think water and energy efficiency. Or an apparel company with strong policies protecting fair labour conditions, still with a focus on the financial side of the investments. Starting here, the philosophy behind the investment slowly moves from do no harm to intentionally do good, which is the essence of impact investing. But before we dive into this, let's finish telling you what it's not. With venture philanthropy, you invest in social purpose organisations, taking high financial risks in order to drive the organisation's impact. Traditional philanthropy is grant-based funding of social purpose organisations, often simply donating money to create maximum impact. Now, impact investing. Impact investing is not an asset class. It is an investment approach across all asset classes, themes and geographies, and has a full range of risks and returns. For example, impact investments can range from a direct private equity investment in a fintech company providing access to finance to underserved populations, to a loan supporting sustainable agricultural business, or from a note subscription in a renewable energy fund to a share purchase in a sustainable forestry fund. As we said, it's about intentional impact and financial returns. When looking at the impact side, one can ask, what's your taste of good? Where do you want to create impact? This can be in services or in products provided, such as building solar-powered lamps for developing regions, developing natural washing products, or producing healthy foods. Impact can also be made in the way businesses are run, or even on multiple levels, such as safeguarding the mining of fair raw materials, honest working conditions, waste management, or offering jobs to those who have less opportunities. Such front-runner companies aim to change the entire industry they work in. Financial profit can be made in countless proven and unproven business cases. So, as with traditional investing, deciding which business models have potential is art, science, and all the fun of investing at the same time. Impact.
Thank you. Okay, so now we get to the how. As you saw, there are multiple ways of investing sustainably, but what particular vehicles can you use? So this is a short list of, and by no means exhaustive list of ways you can invest in various firms or products. Everyone or most people have workplace pensions, which unfortunately don't give you much flexibility, but you can work with your employer or the pension provider to have ESG filters or have specific sustainable filters on your pensions. If you have a saving an ISA or a SIP, individual retirement savings accounts, you have a little bit more flexibility for stocks and shares, ISAs or SIPs, where you should be able to use various filters, various kind of methodologies and tracking tools that are provided by the key marketplaces for these. So these include Hargreaves Lansdown, Interactive Investor, St. James's Place, Nutmeg, etc. For more sophisticated investors, your investment accounts, investment strategies, you can and should incorporate ESG filters onto your strategies. As we saw, they would result in stable returns and possibly better returns. Venture capital trusts and crowdfunding and investing in startups are two of the more high risk and more illiquid kind of investments, where again you have a greater ability to directly invest in impact funds or directly make an impact in a particular venture, but also greater risk of losing your capital. Again, the same disclaimer applies. We are not providing advice. We are only going through some of the available investments and instruments. Okay, so different kinds of investing, as you saw, part of the whole jargon. The beginning, you have ESG, which you just saw, sustainable investing, responsible investing, impact investing, and the key piece here is there are three kinds of sustainable investing. You have exclusions or ethical investing. It's called the basic ethical investing, which effectively means you can just exclude fossil fuels, or you can exclude sin stocks. So some people want to exclude tobacco and alcohol stock. Some people want to exclude fossil fuel stocks. Some people want to exclude stocks with very bad social or governance metrics. So your filtering is actually negative. Integration is the more comprehensive of the three kinds of sustainable investing. That's where you integrate environmental, social, and governance characteristics into your investment methodology. And so you look at both the positives and the negatives, and then you decide the best investments. Inclusion and impact is positive change. So this is what Emily will be going into in a bit more detail, specifically around environmental impact. But inclusion impact means, as you saw in the video, this is actively seeking firms, ventures, startups that can have a positive impact on the ecosystem, on the planet we live in. The same thing as before, but now using the jargon that you will find when you go to your pensions provider or investment marketplace. So the top ACE, which is avoids, considers, embraces, is used by Interactive Investor and a couple of other fund marketplaces. So avoids is exclusions, considers is the integration where you have strict ESG criteria, and embraces is you actively seek firms with a positive social outcome or environmental outcome. Okay, so here are some examples. Again, we're not recommending any of these. This is just simply by going to the Interactive Investor ACE for the investment list, or going to something called the FTSE for Good index series. So again, I realize this is very UK or EU focused, but you have similar similar funds or similar marketplace sustainable filters globally as well. So MSCI, which is another, which is actually the biggest global sustainability index, provides multiple such lists of investments. So you can go into any of these particular investment categories and choose what kind of investments and what kind of style you want, and you should be able to pick up the right fund. Again, these are all liquid investments that I'm talking about. The next session of this particular talk will go into some of the more active and impact-based smaller firm investments. Okay, so effectively, as data suggests, as research proves, you can do well by doing good, by investing sustainably, and by impact investments. So now hand over to Emily to go a bit more into impact investments. I think you're on mute, Tim.
Thank you, Subbu.
Oh.
Hello, hi, sorry. Bit hard with sharing the screen. So thank you, Subbu, and hello, everyone, and thank you again for coming to our talk. It's really great to see so many people interested in impact and sustainable investing. So what I'll be doing is I'm going to give a very, very short talk on impact investing for individuals, and a quick demo of just one solar project that is an investment. So just to remind ourselves of what impact investing is, it is investments made with the intention to generate positive, measurable social and environmental impact alongside a financial return. And I'm just going to play another short video. I don't think I could have made this more concise or easier. There is a video from one of the companies we're going to be looking at in just a minute. And so I thought I'd just play their video.
Are there things you want to change about?
Sorry, some technical difficulties here. All right.
Are there things you want to change about the world, from climate change to better health to sustainable food, but you don't know how? Where we spend our money can make a big difference. But did you know where you invest your money can literally change the world?
Impact investing is one of the most powerful levers for change. Investing our money in things that are good for the planet, like renewable energy, protecting biodiversity, and building sustainable societies, it can provide a financial return in the same way as traditional investments, but it also has a really positive impact on the world. It goes far beyond just avoiding investing in fossil fuels, arms, and tobacco. Instead, it actively supports companies tackling things like climate change and inequality. Like any investment, its value can go down as well as up, but it is great to know your money is changing things for the better. So that's impact investing, helping to create a more positive future for us and for generations to come. It can literally change the world.
Okay, so again, short and sweet, and I think a really good explanation of what impact investing is. One thing I do want to note that, and echo the speaker's disclaimer on investments. Again, this is just an informational session, so and no way to be taken in as financial advice. Okay. So I think everyone has probably heard of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, and which came out about September 2015, just before the Paris Climate Accord. And these are really the benchmark for what you should be using for sustainable investment or impact investing. There are some companies that Subbu mentioned, MSCI, SUSTAINABLY, and they're all using these 17 goals as their benchmark to rate and do impact assessments on not only investments, but companies, NGOs, and also charities. So these are just some of the types of projects that impact investing for individuals, people that have, maybe €25, £25, $25 can go and invest in. And it's not a lot of money for a nice return. This is not an exhaustive list, but you can invest in things like ocean health, sustainable food and agriculture, quality education. And I'm going to be more focusing on solar because this is one of the largest impact investing or impact investments that you can make because solar is very huge right now because the technology has come very far and the cost has decreased rapidly in the last few years. So these are four different companies, four different impact investment companies. Again, not an exhaustive list. And sorry, excuse me, everyone at the NLC will know from previous calls that my cats have caused some issues. So let me just, sorry, everyone. That may happen again. These are four different impact investment companies. And what I've done is I've given you their mission statements. And if you do a quick read through on this page, they're all virtually the same. They want to invest sustainably, but also bring a nice return for their investors. So this is a screen grab I've done out of two of those companies. And what you'll notice when you go on your own and you do your own research and due diligence on different companies, a lot of these impact investment firms are set up the same, and you'll see very similar maps. And they're focused on similar areas, sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, maybe the subcontinent. And the reason for that is what I wanted to go into is solar. And why solar? So solar, according to the UN, access to energy is at the heart of the most critical social, economic, and environmental challenges we face today. There are approximately 1.1 billion people in the world, and over half of them live in sub-Saharan Africa. So this is a huge area where people don't have access to energy. When we talk about solar, we want to talk about how it is a great example of leapfrog technology, and it's key to areas without access to electricity grid. And I also want to mention there are areas in these countries with an electricity grid, but the prices are so astronomical that people aren't able to afford it, so they just don't bother with getting the electric grid technology. And if you're not familiar with leapfrogging, I've given you the definition here, but I'll read it out quickly. So it occurs when a nation bypasses traditional stages of development to either jump directly to the latest technologies or explore an alternative path of technological development involving emerging technologies with new benefits and new opportunities. So I think the biggest example I think that people can relate to in the last maybe 100 years, or not even so, maybe the last 60 years, is the invention of the cell phone. And so what we look at, if we want to look in developed countries, these are generally places with a landline. It was very easily accessible for people to get access to a landline. And I'm aware some people that dialed in don't know what a landline is. They're a little too young. But gradually, cell phone usage kind of increased over the years. And that's because, you know, the technology advanced. However, when we talk about leapfrogging, we want to look at developing countries because there are currently, I think, as of June 2020, 9.5 billion mobile phone users in the world. And that's more than there are people. That's over 1 billion more than people. And that's simply because it's people that didn't have access to personal communication devices, i.e. a landline, and now they have access to cell phones. So that's what we mean by leapfrogging. So when we want to talk about solar, these are kind of things we want to avoid. So on the left-hand side is a gentleman in Lagos repairing a electric pole, and on the right-hand side is in Old Delhi. And this is, again, something we want to avoid. This is when electricity first came around, it was only afforded to the most affluential and richest people. So they put the pole in and one line would go out to that person's house. Well, as the cost of electricity decreased and more people had access to it, a line was added and then another line and another. And you can see what happened here. This is a little bit of a mess and a huge health hazard. So the solution would be something like this. So on the left-hand side, you'll see a house with a personal solar panel in Bangladesh. And on the right-hand side, this is a school in Sierra Leone with solar-powered laptops. And these are things that you can invest in. This is what investing, impact investing is about. You're promoting clean and sustainable energy, good education, and it's also helping the health of people because more often than not, people without electricity in some of the developing countries are still using oil and paraffin lamps, and that's really detrimental to your health. Sorry, we've got a cat situation again. Okay. All right. So I did want to give you just one example of an investment in solar. This comes from one of the companies that I mentioned earlier, and this is basically what it is a loan. So a company called Bbox in Kenya, who produces personal solar home systems, doesn't have the capital. They have the technology and the know-how and the people, but they don't have quite the capital to be able to build and produce all of the personal solar home systems that they want and distributing to the community. So they look for a loan that any individual can invest in. I think the minimum investment for this site is 25 euro. And what you can see here is they're looking for 500,000 euro, which is nearly fully funded. And I think as of today, this got fully funded. So once they have the 500,000 euro, this goes to the company. And what they're going to do is what you see up here. Sorry, it's a little bit small, but this is a 48-month payback period. So this is 4 years. Somebody that has put their money in will not only get their money back, but will get 6.5% return on the money that they've invested. It's quite a long time, and if you've invested only a little bit of money, it's not great, but it's probably a little bit more than you'd get in your savings account currently in the UK and even the US at the moment. And then the really important stuff here, you're helping over 15,000 people get access to electricity that wouldn't have had it. And also saving almost 5,500 tons of carbon. So that's just an example of a really good loan. And to kind of highlight that, the United Nations Development Program did an impact assessment, not on the company that's doing the loan, but the actual company in Kenya, the B-Box company. And they found that they're directly impacting 10 out of the 17 sustainable development goals. And that's probably one of the highest ones I've seen, because no investment's perfect. Nobody's going to meet the 17 goals because, you know, in a perfect world, yes, that would be great. But it's very hard to get, you know, even 5 or 6. So 10 out of 17 is a fantastic impact that this loan is providing. And again, another disclaimer, I know Sue mentioned this a few times, but again, please do your own research and due diligence with an investment you're considering. And a lot of these sites do have their investments, and they have their pros and their cons. So you can do a little bit of research on that, but again, just do your own so you're comfortable with what you're investing in. And I also, again, wanted to make sure you're mindful of the risks. So this is the same company that did the loan out to the company in Kenya. What they've done is they've invested in various loans around the world, almost 45 million euro, which is fantastic as far as impact investing goes. And they've paid back nearly 20 million, nearly half of it to their investors with the interest. But I did want to just sort of highlight this little default right here. 1.7% of that nearly 45 million is in default. And I contacted the company, and basically it was a loan that couldn't be repaid on a solar company, just honestly due to COVID is what they said. And I'm really surprised that this isn't higher, because COVID has impacted, you know, everybody around the world like quite a lot. So I think they've done fairly well for just a 1.7 default rate on their loans. But again, just look at the risks before you do anything. So for the same company, I abstracted a sample portfolio that they had. And what's great about this is what you can see. So a lot of good for not a lot of money. I mean, even if this wasn't 3,000 euro and it was 1,000 euro, you could put everything down here into a third, and it would still be a really great help and a really great impact. So what this is saying is, you know, somebody is invested 3,000 euro. They've been paid about 98 back in dividends, and still 3,000 in loans that are still out there. But what's great about this is you can see they've got 4 different countries that they're invested in, and they're they're meeting 6 of the SDG goals. So for just that small amount, you have given 74 people access to electricity that wouldn't have had it. You've avoided 13 tons of carbon, and you're supporting good health, quality education, economic growth, and you're supporting sustainable cities. So again, a lot of good for just not a lot of money. You wouldn't expect to be helping that many people. And other available investments from the 4 that I had mentioned before, there's some really interesting ones out there. So this one on the left is from a company called BetterVest, and they're very clearly a German-based company. This was technically the English page of theirs. So if anybody's thinking about looking into BetterInvest, grab your friend at the NLC German Circle, and maybe they can help you out in translating a little bit. But they've got some interesting things here. So biomass in Kenya, and this is sort of like the second one here is linens and towels for the hospitality industry. And this is in India. It's very interesting, because what they've done is they've RFID chipped every piece of linen and towel, and they're following the life cycle of it. How many times has it been reused? How has it been washed? How many times has it been transported to be washed? So it's very interesting, and I think it's kind of a good kind of starter firm to see where, you know, what could happen with that. I don't think there have been too many studies in that much detail about linens and hospitality or linens and towels in the hospitality industry. And other things like efficient stoves in Kenya and solar in India and Kenya. The one we spoke about was B-Box here was the one in Kenya. and other different funds that you can invest in. So thank you very much. I hope that was helpful. I know it was very short and we didn't get into too much detail, but I wanted to just make sure people were aware of what was out there. And I'll put this in the chat as well. These are 3 NGOs that will give you more information, not only on the SDGs, but also on investing responsibly. So, they don't make any money off of this. This is purely for information. So I think with that, I'll hand back over to Alex.
Thank you very much, Emily. That's fantastic. And thanks, Subbu, too. Will we put up the multiple screens so I can then see who's... That's it. Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that was great. And thank you both very much indeed. I've learned a terrific amount. But mind you, I started from a low base, so I had a lot to learn. That was great. ESG, FTSE for good, I'd never heard of. So that's new. Impact investing, what to do with my workplace pension, and the sustainability goals. I've memorized all 17 of them, so that's been great. Now, the time has come to open up for questions. I did try and stimulate a live debate on the chat room facility, but that didn't quite take off. So I think we'll maybe go for visual signals. Who would like to kick off with a question, please? And try to attract my attention, and I'll get hold of you. You can ask your question. Angela Style. Unmute, please.
I've just unmuted. When I was a probation officer and a member of NAPO, we took it at conference that we would get our pension fund to invest in a sustainable way. Now that was over 20 years ago. Are the unions still doing that? Because we were very at our annual conference, it was always an issue that was brought up and supported strongly, that we should have our pension funds invested in sustainable manner and not in fuels and not in cigarettes and stuff like that. So is that still happening?
Yeah, thanks, Angela. I think it's actually the word sustainability itself is evolved. The understanding has evolved since, say, the 90s, because if you look at the timeline of sustainable development, in terms of investing, not in terms of English, of course, in terms of investing, because the 90s was, I think 80s and 92 was the ozone depletion and aerosols. So a lot of focus around fossil fuels themselves, and sin stocks. It used to be called sin stocks in the early 2000s. So that has actually evolved and been more sophisticated. So most pension funds now don't have an explicit ESG filter, I'm sorry to say. So it's something that you have to ask them. So there is a so you have, obviously, if you're part of a union and your particular pension fund is part of the union pension, then you should definitely petition them to find out. There is a firm called Share Action. So Share Action that does the same thing, but for private firms, so non-union investments. Say you don't like what Barclays is doing, and then so you can buy $200 or 200 pounds worth of shares, and Share Action can help you raise these questions to Barclays. So there are other ways to do this, but unfortunately, there's no regulatory obligation on a union pension or a workplace pension to provide an ESG focused or a sustainable retirement fund. So, but it's definitely something we should look at collectively.
I agree.
Thank you. Other hands coming up for other questions or comments that you'd like to interject? I see Yisha, please.
Yeah, I was in another meeting, joined you about 20 minutes later, but I do enjoy both you and Emily's talk very much so. But I was thinking about when you said sustainability investment, but do you still should compare with the profitability, isn't it? At the end of the day, you want your investor to grow. So I say this
Investment in
because I gave both my children some money to buy, to get them started ISA this year. So I put in the bank account. So they started investing in ISA, and then I noticed that they choose, because in the ISA you can't choose a single company. You just choose a compilation of things. I think in the compilation of things they choose both of them are very ethical, think about the environmental sustainability. They choose, but I'm a little bit worried. What should I tell them as parents to say? Okay, I give you this money for your start to get ISA. Maybe next year, when you start working, you have to do your own ISA every year. You can't just think about, oh, I like that company because they're doing some things, good things, but you also have to think about the profitability.
Yep, no, I totally agree, and that's exactly which is in the first part where I spoke about. Even if you look at ESG integration or sustainable investing as a purely profitable investment, it still beats the market. It still beats a lot of the other investment strategies. So you're right. I mean, obviously, going back to basic English, a sustainable investment actually means an investment that makes you a return. But that makes you returns while taking care of all the stakeholders, which over the last 10 years, research has proven that's actually better for your firm as well. And like your kids you're talking about who are investing in ethical companies, a lot of market returns are based off of momentum. So
maybe
on the
for
one
the long
hand,
term.
on the long term, most governments are going to put in carbon taxes. Diesel and petrol cars are going to either go out of the market or become very expensive. Fossil fuels are going to become really expensive or unwieldy to use. So you will end up seeing pricing in play, and you'll end up seeing from a purely returns perspective, you'll see that a stakeholder capitalism or an ESG based investing might actually work better for your kids in the long run.
Thank you, Yasha. Thank you, Subbu. And can I see other hands? Paul, I see your Paul Chamberlain, please.
Mute myself. Yes, I was wondering about what risk assessments are available for investments in some of these emerging country loans, for example. You were talking about the various countries in Africa, which the investment looked as though it would do all sorts of good things, and a 6.9% return or something like that, I think, and there was a supposed default of at a very low level. Depends on what time scale that is, of course, but it'd be quite tempting to spread a number of eggs in different baskets with those sort of things to reduce the risk. So you put your 100 euros into this project and 100 into another, and so on, and some of them, perhaps 1 out of 10 of them, will fail. But I wonder what level of monitoring of the risks in these kind of things is available.
So some of the, I guess my first answer would be, it depends on where this country is based, or the company is based in what country. The particular one that I show was based in the EU, so they do have to follow the EU regulations and standards on anything from risk assessment to due diligence on anything that they're doing. But you are right. If you look at some of the other funds or different companies that are doing this, that sounds attractive, 6.5%. I've seen them as high as 11% on some of these investments. And as I said, you do just need to do your own research and double check into them. But yeah, you're right. It's an attractive investment, and maybe you want to spread them across different ones. But I think again, it depends on where the company is based. I think you're pretty safe within the EU because the standard of regulation is quite high. But again, check where the company that you're investing is based.
Yeah.
But
I think
there's no
it's
third-party
the
assessment.
an equivalent investment to this would be a municipal or a junk bond, for example, that gives you. So you will you'd be surprised to see a lot of major asset managers put in, say, Venezuelan bonds, which give you this much return, or Greek bonds. So that's the kind of equivalence you're looking at, where you're actually looking at a higher level of risk. And in fact, as Emily mentioned, there's a lot of due diligence that goes on with these firms. But again, you know, the old saying, if it sounds too good to be true, you have to double check, you have to triple check. That's what we do when we invest ourselves into these ventures. We double check, we find the stability, the solvency of some of these firms. So, I mean, basic analysis still needs to be done.
Thank you, Subbu. Thanks, Emily. I'd now like to pass to Jeremy, please. Can you unmute and pass your question on, please? Thank you.
Hey, Subbu. Hello, Emily. Thank you for your presentation. It was super interesting. I just have a question basically about the industry in general. So we've seen that ESG is like basically a group of like many factors, and it's very hard to measure the performance of companies on all these factors together. So is there a view of the industry giving like a global scores to individual assets for individual stocks, for example? Because you've mentioned funds that are basically investing towards ESG friendly goals. However, as an individual investor, which is the trend now, if I want to pick my own stocks, let's say in my Robinhood account, which is very fashionable at the moment, how would I know about those factors? Is that data available to, you know, every private investor, or is it more something that is like just for professionals at the moment? Are we going to disclose that more and better in the future? How do you see the future coming?
Yeah, I mean, it's actually a very good question. It's actually something that we work on, Pico Analytics. So to give you an example, Morningstar, which is a very big research and data provider in the US and globally, they just acquired SUSTAINABly, which is a big ESG provider. And Morningstar, which actually gives you data on your individual funds or individual investments. So if you log into your Robinhood account or your IG account, and if you want an ESG rating, Morningstar is aiming to integrate their ESG ratings onto individual stock analysis. So that's where the market is going. Unfortunately, like with a lot of these things, it's expensive to get ESG data. So because ultimately a firm has to do something different. It's not like so eventually the way we see the market going is it'll become like a bond rating. So any company, you should be able to find out if it's what kind of credit rating it has. Same way you should be able to find out what kind of ESG rating it has and do your analysis accordingly. But that'll mean that the cost of that data needs to be reduced a little bit. That'll take some time.
Okay. And I just want to say there are a few sort of niche companies out there, or actually nonprofits, and one that comes to mind, I'll put in the chat if you want to take a look at them. It's called Coal Exit, and it's something like coalexit.org, I think. And they're a nonprofit that has actively, they seek donations, but what they've done is they've actively gone in and tried to, and I think they've done it successfully. If you have a look at their website, the information is free for everyone, but you can check your investments to see if they're at all invested in the coal industry. So a little bit niche. You know, it doesn't take into account other fossil fuels and other ESG metrics. But this is hopefully a trend that you know might be expanding is, am I invested in coal or not? And what you can do is ask your pension or investments for the security code, and you can check on this website if you are invested in coal or not. So little things like that. I mean, it's not widespread, but hopefully organizations like this will grow, because that is free information, and that's something I think that people should know, whether they're invested in coal or not.
All right, thank you very much.
I'd like to invite Nick Stregnall to please ask his question. Thank you.
Yeah, it's kind of more of a point than a question to some extent, but it strikes me that in a way we're all ethical investors or ESG investors, because if I came to you and said I can get you 50% return, I have this great company that organizes hitmen, you'd probably, even if I could convince you you were somehow legally detached, would shy away from that. And equally, I think that, because I think it goes Yisha's question about returns, I think the primacy of the return is something that actually we kind of have to slightly dump as investors if we're going to make that change. We can't just go, yeah, but it's only about the money. You have to go, yes, it is about the money, but actually, do I want 50% from murdering children, or do I want, 15% or 8% or 4% or whatever from providing solar panels to children in Africa? I think there needs to be a mentality shift away from just the bottom line. It's not just the bottom line, because ultimately everyone has things they wouldn't do for money. So somehow I think part of the task is shifting away from the purely money-centric notion of investing. And I would be interested to know what Subbu has to say about how you address that challenge, because it's really hard, because the whole point is investing goes, it's about return. And actually, maybe it isn't, because in fact it isn't. When you take the Hitman version of events, you sort of go, well, no, it's not just about the money. I do care a bit about what you do, but how do you convince people they should care more than they already do, perhaps? If that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a very good point, and I think it's almost like look at it as a top-down and a bottom-up confluence. The bottom-up is where individuals, just us, and looking at not just achieving returns, but achieving sustainable returns and returns that do not harm anyone or anything. And from a pure momentum basis, that itself influences regulations and policies. And those regulations and policies then in turn influence markets. So it's like a virtuous circle. So where eventually you will realize that the fact that you did not want to invest money in that Hitman-based venture resulted in that Hitman-based venture going out of business because of a regulation against it. So that's what we drive towards. So again, yeah, we keep talking about politics, policies, different kind of parties, but again, it all depends on where the money is coming from. So, which is why you petition your local pension provider, you petition, you make sure you focus on your pensions, your assets, your investments. That feeds through to the politicians eventually to come up with their own pledges. And that's how you'll realize stakeholder capitalism and shareholder capitalism will eventually converge. Well, that's the goal, I guess. And it doesn't seem that far off.
Yeah, thanks very much, Subbu. Thanks, Emily. Well, this has been absolutely fascinating, and we could obviously spend a lot more longer on this topic, but after a while, I think Zoom is a bit challenging beyond a sort of an hour and a bit. So I'm going to invite Elizabeth Crowther-Hunt, our Business Forum chairman, please to give the vote of thanks. Thank you, Elizabeth.
Okay, thank you, Alex. Well, we've received quite an education tonight, a trip to see the future. Time has flown. And thank you very much, first of all, to our wonderful speakers, Subbu, Emily, and Velson. As Velson said, critical to the core of the business, highly relevant at the moment. To have Emily trained by Al Gore and Subbu, as he describes himself, just the talent. We are indeed extremely lucky at the National Liberal Club to have this expertise and to share it. I'm glad this is recorded and that people will be able to see this again or see it for the first time. It's opened up a whole new world to many of us. Very, very exciting. I can't thank you enough. And also to thank the two forums who put this on together, the Business Forum and also the new, very new Sustainability Forum, which is already making a huge mark in terms of its contribution to the National Liberal Club. It's just so exciting that we have got this expertise. I'd also, of course, like to thank the organisers behind this, which are Alex and Emma, for all they've done to put this on tonight, and indeed the hosting tonight by both Alex and Simon, who once again is helping us out. Thank you very much indeed, and all the other co-hosts. It's been a wonderful collaboration. I think that's, and also just like to tell you that yes, life goes on at the National Liberal Club. These Zoom meetings seem to be working very effectively, revealing indeed the talent and expertise within the club and extending that to new members who come as guests initially to a number of these events. I'd like to remind you that if you're interested in the business forum, all the dates have been set for next year, which I hope is going to allow us to have some live events as well as hybrid events and Zoom events. And Alex will be letting people know what those dates are, and of course what the topics are when we know what they are ourselves, because that is all still in the planning stage. And the same with the Sustainability Forum and what the future plans are for that. And if we are allowed into the club on December the 17th, we might have some informal drinks. So anybody like to join the business forum, I'm very happy to collaborate with any other forums and circles and various groups. So let's look forward to 2021, and thanks again to all of you also for attending tonight. And it's very good to see so many people interested in this subject. I'm sure the National Liberal Club is going to make a massive contribution to what is a highly topical event, again, as Velson has said. So thanks to everybody for a terrific series of presentations. Well done again, Subbu and Emily. And enjoy the rest of the evening. Well-earned drink all round, I think. Thank you very much.